The research that we read for today by Jones et al. Was done to really assess whether indeed digital divides exist on college campuses. And what they wanted to do was to really assess the previous scholarship that had been done. One of the things that's most important to recognize about scholarship relating to communication and information technologies is that things change really quickly, and so it's important to keep up on this scholarship because there can be a big difference between how people use the internet in 2000 versus today, and so it's important to keep checking in and assessing the state of digital divides. So this was primarily their purpose, and what they wanted to understand was whether on college campuses men and women use the internet differently, and whether different racial groups on college campuses use the internet differently and perhaps have digital divides. So they ask the following kind of broad research questions. First, they ask, what is the state of these digital divides upheld by gender and by race on college campuses? Here they want to know whether or not these divides exist and to really assess the state of the digital divide itself. Number two, they ask the question, how are male and female college students and students of different races using the internet? So here is this question of use. Perhaps it's not about access, but perhaps indeed it's about different types of use. And lastly, they ask the question, how might differences cited here inform conceptions of digital divide? So they want to know that whether or not our understanding of how college students are using the internet might indeed inform how we can understand the concept of the digital divide. So what they did was they collected survey data from 40 college campuses, and these were both 2-year college campuses and 4-year college campuses. And they collected these surveys through an online survey system. In total, they had 7,421 students complete the survey. And what the scholars did is they made sure that their sample within this large group reflected and represented the national population of college students in terms of race, age, and gender. Here they were really trying to get a sense of representativeness of the national college student so they can make claims about how representative and how generalizable these data are. So what we find from the Jones et al. Study is both a confirmation of existing research as well as a nuancing of existing data. And I want to talk both about gender and race, and I'm certainly not going to go through all of the findings that these authors came up with because there's a lot of really rich data in here. But I want to pull out some of the key points that I think are interesting about this study. So first, this study showed that there are differences in terms of how frequently men and women access the internet. So here's this question of access and frequency. For example, in this study, 10% less females surveyed had access to the internet for at least 10 years of their lives. Here we're trying to get a sense of a longitudinal use and comfort with the internet, and definitely there is evidence that male-age college students have had access to the internet for longer periods of time than female college students. Additionally, male college students reported being online for longer amounts of time per day than college students who were female. So these longer periods of time is also, again, a difference in access. Consequently, this kind of goes along with that previous finding, male college students reported that the internet took away from their social activities at a greater frequency than their female counterparts. So here we see this question of internet overuse and potentially the internet as a detractor to our social life in more face-to-face interpersonal situations, really playing out in the ways that the participants talked about and responded to the survey. Consistent with the previous research, female college students continue to rank communicating socially as the #1 thing they do online, while male college students listed entertainment as their #1 online activity. And these two things really remain consistent with what the previous research said, even as early as the early 2000s. Also consistent with the research, this study showed that men and women do different things online. So this is a question of use. How do we use the internet in different ways? So for example, male college students checked sports, listened to music, watched videos, and downloaded music at greater frequencies, whereas female college students researched leisure activities such as going to the movies with a friend, finding out what times movies were, or researching their next good book that they're going to read. So checking about leisure activities. And this was done for the female college students at significantly higher rates than male college students. We can also say that this research study tells us a little bit about the landscape regarding race and uses of the internet for different racial groups. So in terms of access, just kind of a base level of how frequently or how much different groups are using the internet, white, Black, and Hispanic or Latino students get on the internet at comparable rates, and they do so specifically to look for information about music, books, movies, in terms of the frequency. And this was about 40 to 50% of each of these groups did so to get this sort of information. And we can also say that these different racial groups have had access to the internet for equally long amounts of time in their lives. This was this question about having access for 10 years. What is different, however, with this study is that the Black and Hispanic students reported that they were more likely than the white students to have begun using the internet at somewhere other than home, mostly at a school. And so this is perhaps a place where questions about race and in its intersection between socioeconomic class could perhaps be explored in further research data. In terms of academic use, one interesting finding to pull out from this is that Hispanic college students were less likely to use the internet to communicate with their professors than their Black and white counterparts. So for example, while 86% of white and Black college students reported using the internet to communicate with their professors, only 63% of Hispanic college students reported doing so. And see, here we have this 20% gap in difference, which is quite a significant gap. Perhaps leading to the question of what's making this gap in using the internet to communicate with professors. And so this is certainly a place where there could be further investigation and further study to be done. And in terms of keeping in touch with friends and family, Black and Hispanic students were much more likely to pick up the phone, call friends, call family members than their white student counterparts. And so here we have this question of using the internet for keeping in touch and for doing social, kind of the social function and the relational function in life. Again, going back to differences in how we use the internet. So in general, we can say that it's possible that the gap in terms of technology and communication is closing on college campuses. And this probably isn't entirely surprising. I mean, when we look at college campuses across the United States, there's relative ease in accessing things like desktop computers, laptop computers, Wi-Fi, and as I know from watching you all in class regularly during the semester, many of you have laptop computers that you bring with you to school every day, and if you don't, you probably have a cell phone that has access to the internet. And so all of this question about the digital divide and access is really not surprising. The gap certainly is closing in terms of how much access we have. I think what's interesting about this study and what this study tells us is that we should perhaps shift the focus to question use and how different groups use digital technologies differently. So instead of thinking about information and communication technologies as in a divide, we should maybe be asking questions about differences. So what are the digital differences in the ways that different socioeconomic class groups, gendered groups, racial groups use these communication technologies?